This is Public Eye, and my name is Fumi. Today we are going to be talking about history and the role of history in building a strong, prosperous nation. A prosperous nation is the one that can take care of the highest and the lowest in that land. How do you do that? Well, they say it's the question between bravery and courage. Bravery means how you can fight or do against an external threat. But courage is how you express who you are. But then how do you express who you are if you do not know who you are, how you got here, so you can project where you want to go? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. The role of history, especially Nigeria's history, in doing that. It's going to be nice, I tell you. So don't go away. We'll be right back and we'll get into the meat of it.
Nigerian history is rich, diverse, and complex, with various cultures, traditions, and experiences. However, many Nigerians have little knowledge of their country's history beyond their immediate surroundings.
Preserving our history is important because I think history tells us where we are coming from, tells us the mistakes we have made and how to avoid making that mistakes in importance.
I think it's very important that we preserve our history so that we will know the things that we should not do again.
People will take more interest in making Nigeria better or wanting Nigeria to be better.
And so I think it's very good that we preserve our history and people learn about mistakes that we made in the past and how we can actually correct them.
We know how to pass our history to the younger generation. At least
it helps us to keep back records for the younger generations coming forth, and gives us something to go back in time and see and know how things has been done or what literally happened in our country way back.
Our history is what makes us Nigerians, or like what makes us us. So preserving it is the same thing as like we are preserving ourselves and like we are leaving like memories and legacy for future people.
So I think preserving the history of the country is very, very important.
Incorporating Nigeria's history into contemporary society can help promote social cohesion, tolerance, and understanding among different ethnic and religious groups, as well as allow us to further develop and preserve our original cultural values and beliefs.
Right, welcome back. It's Public Eye, and today our conversation is about the role of history in building a strong, prosperous nation that works for everyone. My first guest will know because he's a retired director of museums in the National Commission for Museums and Monuments, Nigeria, Mr. Mayo Adediran. Good morning, sir.
Thank you very much.
Very good to have you. Let me tell them a little more about you, because over about 25 years, you headed and curated 5 national museums in Nigeria and headed the famous Lagos Museum at 3 separate times. You were also the president of, you were or are, the president, were or are?
Was.
You were the president of National Museums Association of Nigeria, as well as chairperson for Nigeria of International Council of Museums and vice president and president, International Council for African Museums. Currently, you consult on the J.K. Randall Museum, which is what everybody is looking forward to. It's coming up and alive for us to go and see. Good to see you again, sir.
It's a pleasure being here.
Right.
Thank you very much.
I have a big question.
Yeah.
And that is that which history should every Nigerian know well? And I'll break it down. As a human being, they say you should know the big history. That is the history of the human race and how we came to be. Then you have to know the history of the world, other people other than your nation. Then you have to know the history of your country. But in Nigeria, there are over 400 ethnic groups that make up one country.
Nation.
So which is it? Is it the political history of Nigeria or the history of the peoples that make up Nigeria? Or which history is going to benefit us the most?
Thank you very much. I think the first is to know your own history. The next is to know the history of the country that you are in. And thereafter, you can learn other histories. It is very, very essential because your history runs parallel with other histories. And you need to know and be more specific as to certain happenings in your own history as to your national history.
Right.
You also need to know much about your own country's history against the history of other countries and against the history of the world itself.
Right.
I'm looking at this from the background that there are several world events that touched on our country, Nigeria, that touched on my own people, Yoruba, and till today, many things are still dark about them. But we know that Nigeria, take for example slavery, transatlantic slavery, the Yorubas participated in a world event. To what extent and to what degree did we participate in? What was our responses to the trade? And what were our gains and losses in the trade? We need to bring to the fore some of these issues as to explain to the younger generation of where we came from.
Thank you for breaking it down in the way you have broken it down. I'll go back to how you broke it down.
Yeah.
In learning the history of yourself,
Yeah.
where is one meant to learn that? In learning the history of your nation, because you said once you know the history of yourself, you can also just juxtaposition it with the history of other people. Then if you know the history of your nation, you can know how to manage it along the history of other nations, because you don't live alone in the world. Let us start from the individual. So for me, for example, from Lola Yoda, where do I learn my own personal history, 1, 2, and then where do I learn the history of the nation that I live in? Or is it the nation that I was born in? I'm sorry to be making it like this.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. The first thing about learning your own history is from home, where your father, your mother, your uncles, your aunties will say a little bit of your own history and the history of your people and your race. Ditto, you will also learn the history of the country of your birth or your own national history from home and then from school.
Right.
So that's the sequence in which you learn. And also you read through books and through other social means.
So the home is very interesting that you have started with that. The history of Nigeria, earlier I was asking my audience, who are mostly young people, about some basic key Nigerian history. And we can see now that there's a gap in knowledge, in that area. But I will go back to the home, which seems to be one of the first places to learn from. We know enough of Nigeria's history that there's kind of like a sort of like a cut in history, a break in history, because with colonization meant a certain kind of education that is different from the home, what you would have learned at home. What it might have meant is that maybe your home, I give you a practical example. If you are going to go to school and you are learning one thing, what you're also learning at home may not be at par with what you are learning in school, which is the first place you are meant to learn everything you need to learn from. Something even much more fascinating is if you don't even speak the language of home. For example, not only do you not speak it, but you've learned not to respect what those who might be telling you what you need from home have to say. Do I make any sense to you?
Yeah, you did. Very, very well. Very well. history is a delicate thing. There are many gaps your parents will even create in you in about the history of yourself and of your people and of your home that you need to learn outside. Take, for example, politically now, if your father has done some error in time past, go to politics and you don't know, go into Nigerian politics. And as soon as you signal that you are running for an office, they will tell you some hidden history of your grandparents and all that, which you probably did not know and which you were not told at home. So people dig out facts and all that, but we have not gotten a space, a medium by which we can harness and bring these things together. We don't have institutions of memory where we can have a storage, is a bank of histories for people to look back into.
What are the other things that we don't even think about that are banks for memory?
Banks for memories are books, archives, libraries, you know, all around us. And then dotted monuments that are scattered in cities, in towns, in corners of the cities, in homes, in the frontage of homes and frontage of institutions.
Right.
When you put a monument in front of a building, it's an aggregate storage of an information of things that had happened in the past, that within a very short moment, you can recall history of several hundred years backward.
Right.
That we do not have.
Right.
And that's why there's a gap in a memory.
Right.
You don't have to read everything in books. Just walking along the streets, you need to. Even placing names on the walkway or streets is also a place of storage of information.
Right.
When you walk on a pathway and you see a name in bronze or in metal or in stone or on gravel, something will jolt your mind to say, what is this?
Right.
So, and then the search continues
All right.
to look for other information. And sincerely speaking, as soon as you think a page is filled, you also turn a new page.
I asked earlier the group of young people here, and maybe it's good to do a little context, a little quick context, so that we can put some things together. You know, Nigeria was formed in 1914 as a British colony, and that meant over 400 ethnic groups and tribes were merged into one to form Nigeria. It became one of the largest British colonies in the world. Only 6 years, and that's why I said, you know, I mean, in 1960, you know, that country got independence from the from the British. That was 1960. Between 1914 to 1960, the British ruled the country. 1960, we got the independence. 6 years after that, you know, a group of young UK-trained army majors overthrew Nigeria's democratic government in a violent military coup. That started a process that led to the war, which is still contentious until today. What then happens was that for the next 29 years, a succession of increasingly repressive military governments ruled Nigeria until the restoration of democracy in 1999. In between, there was a war, there was the oil boom, there was all sorts of things which we can go into. But it's important to know that Nigeria then returned to democracy in 1999. And since then, that has been the longest period when we have grappled with the idea of democracy and trying to put all these 400 ethnic groups to agree into one nation and agree on what that one nation is and move forward. It's important to note what this is because all the fractions and all the difficulties between all those years have led to the state of insecurity that we speak about now, today, which makes it harder for young people to go around the country to see anything. So when it comes to political history, who is the midwife that manages what should be and what really is? Because history is also contextual. You know, the content is one thing, the context of it is another thing. Then you have a whole new generation of people who receive information through the internet. And a lot of what was known there was not available and has not become available on the internet. Yeah. So there's a big gap, a gap that technology has enabled, and a gap that a misinterpretation of even the political history has enabled. Who should manage, number one, midwifing what should be, in the first instance, and how do we bridge that gap?
Well, you see, to manage the history of a country require certain institutions who are major stakeholders in it. Number one is the schools. Number two, the universities. And number three is the National Museum. National Museum should have had a museum of contemporary history to address certain issues about the recent events, at least from 1960 to date. The first missing thing in the country today is that nobody knows the article of independence. What it is that brought us together. There was an article or some papers or some written documents that were signed both in 1914 and in 1960 that brought us together. What is that document? Nobody knows what it is. We've searched through libraries, and no historian has ever published that or brought us to the knowledge that these were the certain clauses that were in that article, in that document that brought independence to Nigeria. So on which premises is our independence based? So the universities have not commissioned researches into such things as to enlighten us. And because such a thing is non-existent, the National Museum too cannot go into what it is. So there had to be a dedicated search, a dedicated research into some of the things in the past, so that you tease all the things of lies and sentiments and all that and bring out the facts. So then you begin to know things about our political development. And not until that is done, it will be very, very difficult to. And you can see us going forward and backward.
Yes.
Because even the 1999 Constitution is under some scrutiny, which some people are now querying. Where did it come from? Who were the people who sat down to approve the 1999 Constitution? And until you know the history behind some of these things, it is very, very difficult to forge ahead to know the terms and conditions by which a country moves forward politically.
Right. That's a big point we have come to. Yeah. And I'd like us to think about it and go on a break so others can join us, because it means practically we are not sure what we agreed to.
Not totally.
We are in an agreement where we are not sure what we agreed to, what we said we will do if this doesn't work this way, and how we want to do it. And that has been at every point. Is this a conspiracy theory? Did somebody go and hide all of this? This is under somebody's bed somewhere.
I don't know. The university or people like you now should
start to look for it.
You should start looking for it.
All right. We'll take a short break. When we come back from the break, we are going to go on to that, from that on to even now there are efforts to archive history, especially digitally, and there are people working on it. What are they discovering, and how do we find the basis of our existence in the first instance so that we know what works, what isn't working so well, and what we want to work? Right after the break.
I had the strangest phone call today, Adrian.
I knew your dirty little secrets.
This was another lifetime. Before I met you, Ada.
It's all lies. Isn't it, Adrian?
There's some truth in it.
If your personal life is affecting your work and your colleagues.
If I had told you about my past, you never would have given me a chance.
That is not a decision for you to make.
It's good you came. You see, the Holy Spirit spoke to me about you.
I remember you.
We go way back.
Why are you doing this to us? I gave you everything.
This is a sin.
You
You're a coward! Get out!
Sooner or later, something must kill a man.
Continue our conversation on the role of history in building a prosperous nation that works for everyone. And we are now joined by two gentlemen, and I'll start with the gentleman directly in front of me wearing black, and that's Mr. Deji Olatoye. Mr. Olatoye is an enterprise lawyer, is a specialist in corporate governance, and is an officer of Nigeria Nostalgic Project. I'm a fan of that project. Hello.
Thank you, Ms.
Good to see you.
Thank you very much.
Apparently you met me before.
Yes.
When we were both younger.
A long time ago.
Long time ago. Good to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Nelson Ekujumi is a media consultant specialist in rights and good governance. He was one of the strong foot soldiers of the democratic struggle for political emancipation of Nigeria from military rule. Good
Absolutely.
to see you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure having me.
Good to see you. You haven't
It's
aged
nice
too much. It's
absolutely.
nice to see you again. I can still remember you.
Absolutely.
And all the fights.
Yes, yes.
Why can a new generation not remember?
Well, I think the reason why they cannot remember is not lost on the reason why we are here today, which is the absence of, historical facts. Because I remember as a young man then, we didn't have the distraction that the social media has become. We had genuine facts, and those genuine facts of history were documented in books by renowned authors. But these days, you find young men and women who are swayed by somebody sitting down in a room, concocting an audio voice of facts that is not verifiable, that you don't know the time, the place, and who the author also is. So, when this generation do not seek for the truth, they tend to be misled easily. I recollect as a young man when we were growing up, when you say anything to us, the first thing we do is to go and fact check. We won't run with it because we knew we could easily be, misled. And our generation, which I must also emphasize, we were products of this same society. So when people talk about Nigeria, I tell them, Nigeria as a country has not changed, but the people have changed.
Right. Why did we have a whole generation where nobody seemed to have told them what's up?
Yes. Yes, that has been the case. But if you look at a project like Nigerian Nostalgic Project, it's actually a citizen's intervention, because for a long time we've said things like history has been removed from the curriculum, so everybody was waiting on government to put history back in the curriculum. We also appreciate the work that public officers like Mr. Adedran have been doing in terms of actually archiving and putting on display, and maybe sometimes even in their storage, some of these some of these artifacts, and keeping them for us, as you said, memory bank, But the idea is that citizens themselves can then begin to do the work and then leverage new technologies. So some of these technologies that we consider disruptive today, AI and the rest of it, digital technology also offers an opportunity for us to actually be, to archive these materials, and also to, whereas a school curriculum or even the work of a museum will be official history, official holding, what official and what to air. Now, what we are doing is using digital platforms to actually crowdsource information. And so you are going to find family histories that then begin to connect different families that you didn't know before, national histories, ethnic histories, and the rest of it. So that is also where we are today, that we have an opportunity to actually archive our works and to display it and to actually engage people, which is what history should be. So museums, for example, should be an opportunity to engage history, you know. Right. Curriculums in school should be an opportunity to engage history, not necessarily to drill down a particular version of history. And so online, you can also do that when you archive all of these works and you create an opportunity for people.
So how do we show quite clearly that there's a direct correlation between culture, history, and all of that, and modernity, science, you know, progress? How do we show that?
Yeah, I'll tell you that the place to showcase this specifically is in the museum. The museum plays a central role in bringing about the coming together of all of these dynamics and making somebody to come out with a distinctive identity of what life should be or what he or himself should be. Islam and Christianity has defined a new life for us all. But God, who created all human beings, didn't create us as Yoruba people. He created us in various cultures. And those cultures had certain things that goes with the identities of these cultures. And as he's now trying to bring us into a oneness, he did not change our Yoruba-ness. It's a new creation in us that is bringing about. But your name still continues to be what it should be. And that's the number of things, the confusion that many people are trapped in. That even the name that you bear is not culturally, is not religiously right. Whereas your father and your mother went through a process. And by the time you came into the Yoruba world, you have 5 names that at birth you must have. Abiso, which Uriki, and all that, which are things that comes with your coming into. And if you don't understand your own name and your Uriki from coming, it's difficult for you to have an identity, a clear identity in your head. So, as museum people, you read more than 80, 90 books, but you bring out something small, which encompasses all the things. You read journals. Journals are court papers. They write for themselves. Newspapers write for various audiences, and they use their language. So it's a museum that brings about all kinds of cults into a simple English that a professor and a primary school student can learn at the same time in the same place.
Right. I see a parallel in what both of you have said, because you said, you used a term which is interesting when you said is to engage, because oftentimes people think it's force feeding, is one way, whereas it should be, you know, multi ways, not even both ways.
Absolutely.
And also you mentioned the importance of actually, 1, verification, 2, contextualization.
Absolutely.
You know, because there's so much people pull out, a lot of young people and even older people are discovering new histories or new old history. But the way it's been interpreted, I'm kind of like, whoa, it's more and more, it's being used divisively to polarize different groups of people who ordinarily should come together. What should we be doing regarding that?
Well, I think most importantly, like some of us believe, that the family is the first contact, you know, with civilization by any young man or woman. And we believe because we are in this age where everybody runs with a gadget, no matter how little a boy of maybe about 7 years old already, the parents have, you know, availed him or her a gadget. I think it is imperative that a lot of our historical facts should be, you know, should be modernized in such a way that a lot of this young generation can easily access them. Because while I was sitting down there in the audience, I was listening to the man in the middle, and my mind was ruminating that how do we bridge the gap, because I'm sure that's why we're here. And one of the ways we can easily bridge the gap is to make this information easily and readily available. Because at times, when you go on the social media, you just see a picture of Queen Elizabeth when she was in Nigeria for the late Queen Elizabeth, when she was in Nigeria in the 60s for for our independence, celebration. And you're like, so this woman came to Nigeria, this was how she looked like. You saw old pictures, which are historical facts, of the former Prime Minister of Nigeria, that's Alhaji Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, sitting with his grandchildren, So, it tells that image to the young generation that, look, people, events, are just like you and I. Nobody migrated from the moon. We all belong to a family, we belong to a community, we belong to a society. And because we are in an age in which, unfortunately, and sadly for somebody like me, the young ones want to walk before they crawl. And it is due to the fact that they lack mentorship, which a lot of us benefited from, even though some of our mentors then were people we were looking at from very far off. Because I recollect when I was growing up, the only person you want to be like when you grow up is one uncle living 3 or 4 houses away from yours, who was in the Obafemi Awolowo University. You wanted to become a graduate. That was the in thing. That was the peak of achievement for anybody. Because, definitely once you have university education, the sky is the starting point, And it was a society then that was very, very organized because, people respected culture and tradition. But lo and behold, when you talk about this, because I heard you talk about Ikpele, they'll tell you it's old school. Like, as I'm sitting down here today, I'm fortunate enough to have become a parent now. The young boy of those days, when you knew me, that young chap. And what I do majorly in my home is that once my children, after all the information that they have accessed, I sit them down, I give them information, I tell them that please, because I have my own bias, don't run with it, verify it for you to ascertain, the truth and the objective one. So I think majorly from the point of view of the family as well as the state, we have a responsibility to, align with the thinking of the young ones and make them easily access those critical information that can make for a better society.
What I hear so far is that there are many, many possible existent. On one hand, they are possible, and there are also some that are already existent. Banks of memory, and you've also introduced memorial. What I am wanting to hear is about banks of imagination. How do we take, because also it's very interesting that sometimes we can become trapped in memory. So that we take memory, memorial, into imagination, forward. This is what was, and this is why it was. This is what is. This is now what we can imagine will be, based on what we know before. I can use practical examples for even our audience, mostly who are young. I say, for example, once when I got the tattoo here, they were saying, is it fashion? I said, no. Actually, all my great-grandmothers in Yoruba land, they wore, they had their name on. I wish my Aduke, my Oriki had been written. It wasn't written. And I didn't want to write Aduke in full anymore because I was at a stage in my life where I wanted things to be a certain way. So I got this symbol, and they asked me what is it. I said, this is the Yoruba symbol for transformation and why it's a circle and how we're connected. So once I start explaining it, they get it. Do you understand? They get it quickly in that regard. The other time, I said, okay, what I'm wearing now, this particular form of adire, today can only be done by old women because it takes 6 months to do it and do it properly. What I then challenge them is that, how do you do it in less than 6 months? And how do you actually take this? Because also this symbol means something. How do you take it into, principles beyond clothes? How do you take this transformation into principles beyond the tattoo, because tattoo is supposed to remind you something about yourself. You know, how do I take this into science, for example? How do I take this into gaming? So when I'm working with people and they're animating, they want to do animation, and I said, the face that's on this particular person, why does that face look like that? You know, so this is the connection from memory to imagination. And that's the example I've just given. How do we make this seamless within the culture? Because it will also translate into political economy. Why do we run our country the way we do? The ones we have chosen, why have we chosen it? Help me with this, Deji.
Yes. That's actually very important, because if history cannot be action-oriented, meaning that history is just merely nostalgic, is to talk about a glorious past and all of that. I mean, if you look at Wole Soyinka's book, Dance of the Forest, that he wrote for Nigeria's independence, if you read that book, there's a scene there where he then went to medieval Africa to actually basically predict what the future of Nigeria might be if you're not careful, that we just would repeat the same thing all over again. So sometimes history is that. And one of the things that history would do is to actually also orient you to first make you have confidence in yourself, you know, that your forebears were not savages, and that they created things and that they were scientific. So there's an ongoing excavation, archaeological excavation that is going on in Ife today, where for the first time, at least to my knowledge, we are finding out that Ife, I mean, we know that they had glass-making technology that they used in making beads. We know that they used a superior technology that is called lost wire system to make those. In fact, when they first discovered some of those brass heads, the idea was to say, look, usually societies, you get into Iron Age and then you get into using alloys of metal. It was found out, and so it led to a misdating of those works, because they are thinking, oh, if they did brass, then iron. They found out that Yorubas actually, or the Ife artists actually did brass before they did iron. You understand? Right. So you find out all of those. So today an excavation is going on that is finding out some pavements in Ife. I mean, we are used to pavements being found in Roman culture, in Greco-Roman culture, that they went somewhere and they saw that they paved their roads and that they paved the floors and the verandas and all of that. And that's been found out about Ife today. So first, even that idea that your forebears are not savages is very, very important. And then you begin to also take motifs from which goes to what you're saying. I have a kid who's also an artist, and he likes drawing all of these wonderful, you know, characters, superheroes and all of that. And that's the time I sat him down and I said, look, you also need to think about heroes from your own, you know, people. So when people are talking about Thor, you're also talking about, you know, works of imagination of your own people. So history could be very, very important in that. And as Mr. Adediran said, the museum is actually very important in doing that. So using museums, for example, to design the curriculums, you know, of education, and using the holding, because the reality of museums is that most museums have maybe 60–70% of their holding in storage. They can't display them no matter how big you are, even British Museum. But one of the ways you actually can, even those who don't have on exhibition, is actually to use it to design, you know, education curriculum that kids in schools and all of that can then use to contextualize history and all of that, and then to bring it into the present and to also take it into the future.
How do we take this? Because particularly for a younger generation, the future is theirs. And they have to start thinking and planning it now. How do you take that into the political economy?
Yeah, as I said, one of the 5 major things I talk about, the role of museum in the 21st century, is about political and political economy. You must talk of the new social order, the new society that is emerging. The museum must play along. If you look back to Ife Kingdom, or Oyo Kingdom, Benin Kingdom, they never went borrowing. How did they sustain their own economy for the several hundreds of years that they existed before the British came and pulled those government down? We have a lot to learn from our past. And if we say we don't want to listen or read our histories again, then we're entering into dangerous terrain. Some years when I was in service, I was a curator at the National Museum in Calabar. And then there was this National Education Research Council who came, who drew curriculum for schools and all that. Do you know, museum was totally missing in the agenda.
Wow.
And it was a standstill. In fact, we had to call on the governor to call the meeting off. You know, because if museum is totally absent in the place of learning, then it's useless.
Right.
Education is useless. Because that's the only place where you can come face to face with your history. That's where you can come face to face with materials that you can use successfully to interpret. I've written some papers on this silent conversation. When people enter into the museum and see some objects, they go into a silent dialogue, not into objectification as to worship, but it is as to unravel the make of those things. And I used to say, even to today, young artists who go to display, who had come to display in museums, they put certain things together which, until they explain such things to you as you did with young people, won't understand.
What I've heard so far is that in terms of even advocacy, what we should be talking about needs to happen. There are several pillars. One is the family. Yeah. Two is the media, information, yeah. And you know, media is every type of media, social, whatever. Media, yeah. You know, three is education. Yeah. All the forms of education. Media is also part of education. All the forms of education that exist. Three are the banks of memory that, you know, are curating memory, and that's where museums. And as you have said, the concept of museum is not just a building, particularly now. You know, a museum can be virtual, there can be all sorts of things, you know. And then, of course, you're also talking about digitization, because that's part of what you're doing, compendium that actually takes it into the formats of tomorrow, you know, everything. So those are the different areas, and all those areas have to come together, you know, with people who make policies. And you know, when we talk about policy, people always think about just government. There are people in corporate organizations who are making policies for that organization. So that's all of us. The person in the house is making policy for his home.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
You know, so the father, the mother, everyone, they are all policy makers of different sorts. So we all understand where all of this is in getting to where we need to go to. I'm going to take a break so that we can understand what's in the mind of the younger people. I'm not a believer in too much representation, but in participation. Let people speak for themselves. Yeah. Let's take a break.
Yeah.
I had the strangest phone call today, Adrian.
I knew your dirty little secrets. This was another lifetime. Before I met you, Ada.
It's all lies. Isn't it, Adrian?
There's some truth in it.
If your personal life is affecting your work and your colleagues.
If I had told you about my past, you never would have given me a chance.
That is not a decision for you to make.
It's good you came. You see, the Holy Spirit spoke to me about you.
I remember you.
We go way back.
Why are you doing this to us? I gave you everything.
This is a sin.
You're a coward. Get out!
Sooner or later, something must kill a man.
Right, welcome back, and it's Public Eye. We're talking about the role of history in building a prosperous nation. And we've gone different directions, and I think it's time to bring it in, especially involve the audience who are mostly young people. I shall start from my left-hand side, because I think there's a lady who has a mic already.
My question is about the system of education. Most of the times, they talk about foreign education system that's, and the history of Western education, instead of telling the Nigerians, about our own system of education and about our history. I'll take example of Badagry. We have the slave port there. So many people don't know about the slave port, but they will tell you the history of the school. They will tell you the history of Germany, the history of France, the history of so many countries. But we in Nigeria here don't know much history about our own country, even where Lagos State here, where we stay. That's my question.
My question is, I know we've talked about books and museum, but we've not talked about movies. How movies comes to play in our modern history, because some people use movie to like tell us about a certain history or a culture. So that's my question.
The content of even the history, that's what she's talking about. Yeah. And there tends to be a lot of focus on either foreign history or even our history only as it relates to our engagement with foreign.
You see, if you want to talk about slavery, it is about the ruling class. And you want to, they're still in power, so how do you do that? So rather than do a thing that will hurt the ruling class, you divert the attention to somewhere else.
If I may just come in briefly on that. If you look at last year, by some coincidence, both in Nollywood and in Nollywood, the history of Oyo, equestrian culture, horse riding culture became very, so if you look at Women King, which is a, Nollywood, it's about Oyo's equestrian culture and how the Benin women defeated it and all of that. So you see the way that film has actually, if you look at all of that, and it's by coincidence. I mean, the people in Hollywood are not talking to the people in Hollywood, but you see the way that all of this was being explored, by filmmakers.
I think in addition to what you have said, our history is documented even in our songs, even in our literature. And thinking forward, I want to suggest that maybe we should be looking at a media arm that will be focused primarily maybe on Nigeria's history, running, a TV or a radio program, that will be talking about our history, looking into our past, with a view for us to reinvent the wheel going forward. Because when you listen to some of our songs, you'll find a trace of where we are coming from.
History is very important in any nation's building. So my question is, why is most parents and our government, they don't really want the youth to get involved, like teaching them or for them to know more about the history? So why most parents and most schools just don't want to get the youth really to get involved? Because I remember growing up those days, I asked a lot of questions and I'm very inquisitive. So when I ask some questions, the reply I usually get is, there are some things you shouldn't know for your level.
So Mr. Adediran is asking why parents and also government don't seem to want young people to be involved or to know more about history. That, for example, when he would, as a curious young person, when he will ask questions, even in his family, they will say there are some things you shouldn't know at your level.
Let me tell you a short story. I was consultant to the development of the Parliamentary Museum for the National Assembly for 8 years. Just when we were about to set up a temporary exhibition, something happened in the Senate. The maze was taken. That was the end of the museum. So people don't want certain aspect of history, certain aspect of events being made public. So if you touch about some of the taboos of your family and all that, and culturally, I used to say, Nigeria and Nigerian societies had their own idea of what a museum should be. But our museums are exclusive. It is not as inclusive as what we have today. Even if a father has a collection, if his son has not grown enough to be a man, he may not be introduced into the father's collection. So it has to be the management of certain information. If you go to the National Museum in Lagos today, we had an exhibition which says the life cycle, art in the life cycle of man, and we broke it down into 7 stages. The second stage after birth is learning. And until you become a known adult, only then can you be initiated into the learning process of your people. So if, as we had today, where people see things and quickly they go to the social media to share, you have destroyed certain aspects of. So they need to stay and watch and see what happens. So these are some of the cultural issues that do not make people to hand over easily historical and generational things to young people.
I'm going to leave each of you with a recommendation. Please leave us a recommendation for somebody to take forward. I start with, Mr. Adedron, because he's the most experienced here.
Well, one of the things I like to say is that for every history, there are parallel histories. For your own race history, for your own family history, there are other parallel histories. So parallel histories must be a consideration to our understanding of our history and other histories too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I think going forward, we must encourage the young generation to try and avail themselves of as much information as far as they can get, and that our history is not replete with savages or barbarians. We've had scientific developments right from the days of old. We talked about the Ifa corpus, and so many other forms. We also need to encourage ourselves right from the family about the marriage between our indigenous history as different ethnic nationalities, as well as the history of Nigeria as a country that became one. So I encourage us all to, go out there, seek for the truth, like the Bible says, and the truth shall set you free.
Right, DG.
Yes. What I'd like to say to Nigerians, especially young Nigerians, is that we should take history seriously as citizens, and we shouldn't wait for the curriculum to return. Because when the curriculum does return, we are going to have debates over it anyway, and you are going to be well placed in that debate when you yourself, you have, made sure that you understand your history. So as a citizen, you should make sure that you understand your history, read vastly, make use of the device that you carry all about, join groups, that do a lot of history. Then in terms of the content of the history, try and have those 2 things that I said in mind, which guided us in NMP. Collective history and connective history, What collects us as Nigerians, our identity, our history, our experiences together, and what connects us as individuals, as families, as nationalities, tribes. So as Mr. Adedron said about, the relationship between the Igbo and the Efik and the Ibibio, where they live together. I mean, there are places in Ondo State where somebody can be at the same time Ijo as Yoruba. Our forebears have always lived together, they exchange. Then theirs was not a history of conquest, always. There was conquest, there was history of trade, of relationship, exchange of culture, and all of that happened. So we should always bear all of this in mind when we interpret history.
Well, I can't thank you enough for joining us. I hope everybody is satisfied. At least you have a lot of things so I can see on the faces that you are thinking about several things. Even if it's just, and some people will argue and say, look, me, I just want to Japan, and you get your Nigeria. Wherever you Japan to, you are still going to interact with people of different races, different, all the identities, and the more you sit in your own self, the easier it is to deal with other people. That's on one hand. Aside from which, whether it is coding, whether it is science, architecture, music, anything in the creative industry, medicine and all of that, everyone takes the core from who and what they are. Because at the end of the day, all the rules of life, of nature, science, all of those, they are universal. But the entrance into it and the use of it is very much personal, it's geographical, it's cultural. I wish you all well, and I thank you for watching. We'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.